All right, folks, we're going to go ahead and get started. So my name is Jason Williamson. I am the executive director of the Center on Race, Inequality, and the Law here at the law school. First of all, thanks to all of you for being here. I know it's already been a long day, good stuff, but a long day. So I appreciate everybody hanging in, and hopefully we'll get some folks straggling in here over the next few minutes. Our next panel is gonna focus broadly on environmental justice and climate change, and this is within the larger context of racial capitalism and the connection to the legacy of slavery and white supremacy in this country. I just want to say I'm really grateful to be here for this conversation. I think it highlights what many of us already know intuitively, which is that all of these issues are connected and overlapping. And to the extent that we fail to recognize that, I think we miss opportunities to learn from one another, to build on the work that so many folks are doing across all sectors of this society where racial injustice shows up, which is everywhere, of course. Now, I understand that environmental justice in and of itself is a huge topic, and I am not under any illusions that we're gonna break it all down here in an hour. But what I'd like to do is build on the ideas and things that have been so brilliantly fleshed out in our first two panels by talking more specifically about the work of dismantling or replacing racial capitalism and how that work is actually being carried out in specific places. So we're going to engage in this discussion through the lens of the on-the-ground work taking place in response to the current water crisis in Jackson, Mississippi, and the incredible work being done by the Sustainable Economies Law Center based in Oakland, California. I'm going to do some very quick intros here, and really I want to allow our panelists to take up as much of the airspace as possible, so you guys won't have to hear from me. It looks like we have our fourth panelist as well, Dr. Sophia Omari. I'm going to pass the mic to her shortly, but let me first, I'm going to give just a quick name and title intro and allow each of our panelists to provide a little bit more of a description of the work that they do, and then we'll jump into more specific questions. So first, we're joined by Brooke Floyd, coordinator for the Jackson, Mississippi People's Assembly. Brooke.
Yes, my name is Brooke Floyd. I live in Jackson. For the past 20 years, I've actually been a teacher and running a nonprofit and after-school program for inner city students in Jackson, Mississippi. October 2021, the pandemic kind of not opened my eyes. I already knew they were there, but it highlighted the vast disparities in education and resources and everything between the babies that I was serving and the ones that had everything. And it usually was drawn on color lines. And it led me to leave what I loved, which was educating children, but branch over to get the grownups to get some act right, is what I told them when I left. And that is what I do now in leading people's assemblies, which is educating the people, providing a path to the electoral process, co-governance, and really just engaging our community to be more involved and to know what is happening, and also to provide the opportunity to let our community members come up with the solutions to the problems and issues that we are facing.
Thanks, Brooke. And of course, we're going to give each of the panelists plenty of time to go into a lot more detail around their work. But we're also joined by Dorian Payán, who is legal apprentice with the Sustainable Economies Law Center. Dorian.
Yeah, hi. So not an attorney yet, but I'm becoming an attorney through California's Law Office Study Program. So doing the punk rock version of law school, I guess you can call it. And yeah, it's really great. My study is both incidental and like a central piece of the work that I do. So I'm learning as I'm practicing, or in the insulation of practice, I guess, by my coworkers. Yeah, and I get to do that every day, so I'm really excited.
Thanks, Dorian. Alejandra Cruz is a staff attorney with Sustainable Economies Law Center. Alejandra.
Hello, everyone. I'm really excited to be here. I'm a staff attorney with the Law Center, and I work mostly on our land justice work. And we are a worker self-directed nonprofit. So when I started 2 years ago, I was able to choose what I wanted to focus on, and our land return and rematriation work really chose me, I would say. I'm also one of the supervising attorneys in our radical real estate law school. And that's just amazing for me that folks get to go and get this legal education and have so much agency and autonomy in their study and don't need to kind of engage with the student loans and some of the hazing that's involved in law school. So I'm really excited for that and to share some of our work with you all. Thank you.
Thanks, Alejandra. And incidentally, there's obviously a whole other conversation, maybe symposium to be had around legal education and alternatives to how we approach it. And the folks at Selk are doing some amazing work in that regard. Last but not least, we are joined by Dr. Sophia Omari, who unfortunately was not able to join us in person, but we're so grateful that she could be with us via Zoom. Dr. Omari, can you just say a quick word about who you are and some of the work that you're doing, and we'll jump into some more specific questions.
Good afternoon. First of all, I'd like to thank everyone for inviting me to be a part of this panel. I am Sophia Omari. I am the Chief of Staff for Mayor Lumumba in the city of Jackson. I come from a scholar activist background, having been in the academy before going to work for Mayor Lumumba, and I was also the chief of staff for his father during his brief stint as mayor before he passed.
Thanks so much. All right, so let's jump into some substance here. I'm going to start with you, Brooke, and before we start talking about the specific implications of the water crisis in Jackson, which I'm sure many of the folks in here have been following to varying degrees. Can you talk as someone who grew up at least part of your childhood right in Jackson and who's been a longtime resident of the city about kind of the larger historical context in which this crisis is happening? I don't think any of us should be naive enough to think that this just kind of happened out of the blue. And so I'd love for you to kind of frame it for us and tell us a little bit about how we got here.
Yes, so I moved to Jackson in 1987, but before that, my father's parents are from Jackson. My father grew up in Mississippi, so we often visited. My grandmother boiled water when I was a little girl, and I used to come and visit. She boiled water, would carry those big pots from the stove to wash dishes, to cook with, to wash her fruits and vegetables, because she did not trust the safety of the water in Jackson. That was in the early 80s when I used to go and visit. I was born in 1979. So that is how long that this has been going on, and it was going on for much longer, I assure you. Just to give you some historical context, I know everyone thinks they know about racist Mississippi, but let me break it down a little bit for you, because everyone has these issues, I assure you. It's just Mississippi bears the brunt of it and has been allowed to continue it in the face, I guess is what you want to say, okay? New York has its problems, and so does everywhere else. And I lived in Chicago for a number of years, in Missouri too. I'm actually originally from Missouri, so I've been blessed to be a part of several different communities. So our current governor, Tate Reeves, I know you probably, if you paid any attention, you probably heard on the news that, you know, he fixed it. It's done. It's the mayor's fault. Current administration did it. They didn't use their money right that they were given. They didn't use their ARPA money. Okay. So every mayor in my lifetime has asked for money from the state for aging infrastructure. Aging infrastructure is a problem all over the United States. It's not that crazy to imagine that we would need to fix it. What makes Jackson unique is, though, that when I moved there in the 80s, I was one of 6 people in my elementary school that was Black. When I graduated from that same school district, the tides had changed. White flight had occurred. We call them bougie Blacks, but Black people that had money moved out of the city. Okay. And so what was left, the majority, were people that didn't have a lot. Okay. The majority of those people were Black people and now brown. So we have Black and brown majority. 80% of the population, I think the census has said, is Black. I'm going to say it may be more because we don't like to fill out the census. We don't want them, the government in our business. In fact, I had several parents at my after-school program. They were like, I'm not filling that out. I want them to know where I live, what I do. I'm like, well, they already know because they sent it to you. Okay. So you're dealing with that. So it's 80%. And so I would say then also that a lot of our brown population did not get counted. Okay. Because of those same reasons. And then if you recall the raids that went on right before that. So there was a lot of things that went into that last census that I do not believe people were counted correctly. And we also had the largest population in the state of Mississippi percentage of Black people, okay? 39%. Oh, that's enough to sway an election, you would think. But then out of that, 15%, which is like 130,000, I think, adults, of Black adults are permanently banned from voting. So you have a disinvestment on purpose of our city and our infrastructure. You have, before we even started becoming a predominantly Black capital city, you had white mayors ask for money and they still didn't give it, okay? So now you have moved on because we were Republican-led, well, excuse me, Dixiecrat, but now we're Republican-led. So you're Republican-led, governor, legislature, whatever you want to call it, okay? Now, they're not spending money. Revenue is declining in this capital city. You're making sure that the majority of the Black folks can't vote because we are over-policed, over in prison. And I can go on and on about that, but that's not this panel. And then we don't fund education. The last time the state of Mississippi fully funded public education was 2007 to 2008. And that was right when the recession happened. So guess what? They stopped funding it halfway through the year. And I was a teacher then. And we were funding it to the bare minimum. So completely funding education in the state of Mississippi was 50. Oh, I'm sorry, 49th. So now you have a population where you made sure you didn't educate them, made sure they can't vote. You're putting as many adults as possible in jail. You're arresting them. You're making sure the jobs, minimum wage in Mississippi is the bottom of the barrel. We are not here where, what is it here, 15? Oh, wow. That's a high paying job in Jackson, in Mississippi. Okay, and we make sure that that does not happen. So you have people that are not earning a livable wage. Do you care about going on Tuesday during the day to go vote on an off-term election? Because we make sure we don't have it on the big time when it's the presidential election, so nobody pays attention. And you're not going to get those hours back for that measly $7.25. So no. We have set it up perfectly here. Okay, so you have all these things in play. We're not funding healthcare. We're not funding education. I think there are so many hospitals in the state of Mississippi that have closed now. People are literally dying trying to get to Jackson because the rural hospitals have closed over asthma attacks. having an uncomplicated childbirth. They just can't get to the doctor. So you have all these things in play. Jackson has turned black, predominantly black and brown. And we are the bane, apparently, of our governor's existence because he is hell-bent on making sure we don't get any funding. And yeah, that came out real Southern. But that's the only way to say it. So, for example, April legislative session was ending. We had wonderful bills that were up for us that would have created and generated lots of revenue. Our governor vetoed them on the grounds that we need to get our water fixed and we need to do something about our violence. Last time I checked, resources help both of those things. Financial resources help both of those things. And those two bills would have generated lots and lots and lots of money for our city. And he vetoed them immediately. So we are constantly in a state where the governor, this one and the ones before, have purposely not invested in our city or our state, but in our city especially. AP broke the story in October after one of our water marches, which I'll get into later, where he is quoted on a conservative radio talk show saying that, oh, this is when he was the state treasurer now. Oh, I just make sure it never makes it to committee, never gets out of that room. That way Jackson doesn't get the money. That's when he was the treasurer. He has been the treasurer, he's been lieutenant governor, and now he's the governor. If you keep up with scandals, he is now, well, excuse me, all you know about is Brett Favre. Brett Favre's not the governor and not in control of any of that welfare TANF money. Who was the governor at the time was Phil Bryant. The lieutenant governor was Tate Reeves. Tate Reeves took, I believe, 22 or 27 million of that money, gave it to his personal trainer. Personal trainer then reinvested half of it back into his gubernatorial campaign. Meanwhile, the water crisis that we are dealing with that you all found out about on August 29th, we didn't have water for a week. 1 week. Kids had virtual school because COVID. Virtual school existed. 2018, there was a winter storm. My students didn't go back to school from Christmas break to almost Valentine's Day. Virtual school didn't exist. This is a long-term problem that we have been dealing with. The residents in Jackson have known about these issues. They have talked about them. We voted. Previous Mayor Lumumba came to us through people's assemblies. How can we fix our own water since the state doesn't want to help us? Guess what we all came up with? Let's raise our taxes. We're going to add a 1% sales tax because back then the bill wasn't 1.4 billion yet. So we wanted to tax ourselves. We all voted, the city of Jackson. Yes, we got it. We won. Yay, we voted. The state came in and created a state-appointed commission that does not look like me to oversee how we spend those funds. Now, I love where I live, but I get very emotional about it because you see how all these things, and then our governor goes on TV and it tries to imply that Black people don't know how to handle money or that they've misspent it. Meanwhile, he has stolen, him and his friends have stolen money that could have been used, fix the water, feed people, I don't know. So there's a lot of historical context around this water crisis. And it's not just the water. It's so deeper than that. It is so deeper than that. I think I've covered a lot of history.
Covered a lot of ground and painted a bleak picture. But we're here to tell the truth. So I appreciate you doing that.
I'm gonna tell it.
Let me ask you, Dr. Omari, to jump in here, and I'm going to ask you to cover a lot of ground, so you can pick and choose here. But I wanted you to say a word about what drew you to Jackson in the first place. You mentioned your your activist background, and in particular, how you think this water crisis connects with all the other sort of issues around inequality that Brooke kind of laid out. But I'm also curious to hear your thoughts about the challenges around pushing back against this from your perspective within city government, and understanding that the city government in Jackson is unlike probably most other city governments throughout the state in terms of who the mayor is and his politics and so on. So if you could just add a little more color for us from your perch in the mayor's office.
Okay, I'll start with what drew me to Jackson. I actually came to Jackson to do organizing with the senior mayor Lumumba in 1989. So Brooke, you beat me by a couple of years. I've also known Brooke for a long time because of the community activism and the work with the Lumumba family. The concept of self-determination, really, that Black people should be able to control our own lives based on how we think we should live and those things that are important to us. And really, that's what drew me to the South with a majority Black population. Felt like we could do a lot of work in organizing and helping move Mississippi towards self-determination. Brooke talked about the demographics, 38% of the state population, but she also talked about the disenfranchisement that has historically been a part of what went on in Mississippi. I think the documentary 13th really outlines the political philosophy behind the imprisonment of Black men and women. And in a state like Mississippi, it truly does become modern day slavery, enslavement of folk of color in Mississippi. So that's why I came to Mississippi to do this kind of work. Now, Brooke said it. I mean, she was very clear about the circumstances that exist within the state with this relationship with the city of Jackson. And I would like to say that you could predict that Jackson was going to become a majority Black city long before it happened. They saw it coming. And so that disinvestment began, even like she mentioned, under the white mayors, who also knew that their time was limited. So when the first Black mayor was elected, I think in the 90s, it became very apparent then that Jackson was going to be struggling to get the kind of resources that it needed to keep moving forward from the state. And this is prior to the last 20 years. I think Jackson's population has dropped by about 40,000 people. And that's a lot. And it is, they've all moved, as Brooke said, to the suburban areas where all of the resources that should be coming to Jackson have been diverted. So I kind of laugh when Brooke said that we are the bane of the governor's existence. And we truly are. But the fact that we're the capital city and that we're predominantly people of color, that the mayor himself is a young Black man from a politically active family, raised to be an advocate for community, for people, and is not your typical politician. He will speak the truth. And it is the truth that's being spoken right now about why we are in the situation that we're in that drives his animosity. For the governor of a city to make a statement that it's always a good day not to be in Jackson, which is his capital city, which is where he's supposed to work, to deflect the attention of the state's neglect, open disinvestment, and their disdain for Black leadership and the Black population of Jackson. As a matter of fact, they love to say, well, Jacksonians get what they deserve because they keep electing the officials that they elect, as if Black people don't have enough sense to elect people who are acting in their best interest, which is what the mayor has done. So that's the situation. And I think the biggest challenge from me being inside city government, you always, as an activist, I consider myself a revolutionary, which means you don't reform, you totally change, right? And being in city government has helped me to understand that you cannot, it's Audre Lorde's quote, you can't use the master's tools to dismantle his house. I mean, it's that clear. That's what being in city government has taught me. Because the idea that you can serve people better, yes, that's great. And it's noble. But when you look at all the institutionalized restrictions on what you can do in the service of people while in government, you understand that it was designed for government to continue to behave in the way it has behaved in the past, regardless of how progressive, how forward-thinking, how revolutionary the people you think the people are that you elect. So that's the lesson that I've been taught over the last 5 years in city government. This administration has moved the city from one crisis. The water crisis is just, I guess, the biggest and the one that has garnered the most national attention. Brooke talked about our public education system not being funded. When we came in the office, one of the first things the state superintendent of education did was come in and deliver a 500-page document to us as city. Now, granted, the city funds, does give some funds to the school district, but the school district is run by the school board, right? But she brings us a 500-page document that says, JPS, Jackson Public Schools, is a failing institution and we're getting ready to take it over. Okay, so, I mean, we didn't even know where all the closets were in City Hall at that time because we just gotten there. But one thing the leadership team was clear is that Mississippi has a history of taking over school districts only to rob the budgets of those school districts and not to improve the quality of education. And so we were determined that that would not happen under our watch. And we fought, we built a community coalition. We got some of the business community and we went to the governor and convinced him not to sign off on the takeover, even after, and this was Phil Bryant, even after the superintendent of education, that board voted to do it. Since then, because of our concerted efforts, we've been able to bring JPS from an F to a C. This past year, they were graded a C. that was self-determination, because the things that happened within the school district came from the community. The implementation of what parents needed to help their kids be successful, what our school district needed, they passed the bond measure so that we could just upgrade the facilities. The buildings were depressing. They had suffered from deferred maintenance. It was clear, you send a kid into a building that looks like that, they're not going to value education because they see you don't value the places where you're sending them. So those kinds of things are the disinvestment. We have one grocery store, one major grocery chain in all of Jackson, and that is Kroger. And they have systematically closed every grocery store that they had that was located in a community of color. So this is the kind of the concentrated effort to destroy Jackson and Jacksonians, and then utilize the resources that are in Jackson so that, one, we can gentrify, right? And two, we can return Jackson to white control. So that's my perspective on it. And I guess I've said enough on that right now.
Thank you for that, Dr. Omari. I think, so just a couple of themes I want to just point out here. One is that it's clear, if it wasn't clear already, just based on what we've heard in the news around the water crisis, that this is intentional, right? This is not something that just happened. And I think, one of the distinctions between environmental law generally and environmental justice is marrying that environmental law with racial justice, right? And when we talk about racial justice, we have to acknowledge that a lot of what's happening to communities of color is part of the plan. I mean, this is how it was supposed to play out. And so the water crisis is clearly just one piece of a larger effort, very intentional effort in Jackson to destroy that particular Black community. And we'll return before we finish here to hear some thoughts about how to push back. And I know that there's been a lot of efforts to do that over the years. But before that, let's turn to Alejandra. I wanted you to talk, Alejandra, a little bit about, you've as you mentioned earlier, been involved in a lot of different sectors of work where racial justice is concerned, education, healthcare, immigration, et cetera. Can you talk about your work itself generally, but thinking about the common threads that tie all of those efforts together and what brought you to Selk specifically, given the background that you have and the things that you experienced up to that point?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I grew up in the Central Valley of California, and my family was food chain workers. So they worked in the fields and the packing sheds, in factories for Del Monte and Foster Farms and Ragu. And, there was all this abundance in the Central Valley. And at the same time, our families faced a lot of the traumas of poverty, including food insecurity. So just holding those two things as a young person was really formative for me. And just noticing in spite of, racism and structural inequality, there was such a sense of community care and really nurturance of each other. But there were a lot of obstacles to separate folks, like ranking in the education system. So, making sure that the folks like the white ranchers were in the AP classes and all the Black, there wasn't many Black students at the time, but a lot of the brown and immigrant students were ranked differently. And, so seeing all of that inequality, seeing the fear that was instilled through mixed status families from the immigration system, I was really drawn to sites of resistance around that. So growing up, it was cool to see my cousins fight back against the ban on affirmative action by walking out of school. And, when I was thinking about going into law school, there's this huge immigrant rights uprising in California where 1 million people came out in LA and really fought back against these draconian immigration laws. So to me, all of these sites of resistance are also intentional sites of creating inequality so that the working class people can't rise up together and engage in that community care. And so the work that I do at the Law Center is really geared toward remembering and reminding ourselves of our interdependence, that we do not only have, a role to play in working the land, but we can have a relationship of love with the land and with each other on the land. And really now I'm in a position where I can look to Indigenous women leaders like Karina Gould of the Sogorea Land Trust in the East Bay, or Chief Colleen of the Winnemem-Wintu tribe in Shasta County, and see that they're really bringing their spiritual work into the picture of rematriation and receiving stolen land back into ancestral lifeways. And for me, it's so beautiful and inspiring, like as a brown woman that has been severed to some extent from my Indigenous roots, to see these cultures that are fighting for survival actually gaining traction and getting land back. And that to me is so healing. So I just feel so blessed to be able to support those efforts. A lot of what rematriation is really looking towards Indigenous women leaders as a way to heal ourselves and the land and fight against patriarchal violence and dominance culture. And yeah, I just think that in all of the ways that I've been involved in different movements, there's always been strong women leaders and Black and brown leaders who have come forward, youth, elders, to really speak up and support the empowerment of their communities, where our communities have been systemically and systematically disempowered, and we're made to feel isolated and less than. And just to close off a little bit, something that we got an opportunity to do at the Law Center was we visited the Winnemem-Wintu tribe in their land in Shasta County, and they invited us in to their prayer circle. And when we got there, they reminded us of their relationship with the Chinook salmon and how they were trying to restore the salmon to the creeks and to the waterways. And they brought us into the prayer circle. And as they're like preparing us to pray with them, they have a sunflower root, and everybody, gets the smoke of the sunflower root. And they remind us that we have nothing to fear, right? And when we were in the circle talking about how to move forward, land return and rematriation work, Chief Colleen was imploring us, listen to the crackle of the fire. The part of you that feels that you're not, you don't have anything smart to say or anything to contribute to moving this forward, that crackle of the fire can remind you that this is your fight and that your voice is important. And it was so healing to be a part of that community and to hear that from her. And I just think that is going to be what heals our wounds. It's going to be one of the sites for healing for us.
Thanks so much, Alejandra. I want to come back to a couple pieces of that, but before we do, Dorian, my understanding, in addition to being a legal apprentice at the Law Center, that you also direct the land relations work. And I'm just curious if you could talk a little bit about what that work entails, what attracted you to it, given your own background, and why you think this is an important piece of just environmental justice work generally.
Yeah, definitely. So I've been at the Law Center for about 2.5 years now, but the Law Center itself precedes me 10 years. And there was always a land piece to the Law Center. Except when or a little bit before I arrived, I noticed that it was being organized similar to like what the modes of production are in capitalism. So there was some sort of like labor, there was land, and then there was, in one way or another, I guess, like, land or law. So it sort of seemed to mirror what the classical modes of production were, and that sort of seemed dissonant to me. Now it's entirely different, right? Because it's impossible to separate labor and land. And so I guess to rewind a little bit, I came to the law center as a farmer, having done land work for a couple of years, and feeling really frustrated by how organizing around land was. The title that we use, that I technically have, and that we sort of try to uplift at the law center is holistic land relations, and I was very much in opposition to what I felt were fragmented land relations and the way that I was organizing with the land. There was something really stressful about the season, just being conscripted to the season and not being able to organize outside of the season. Or if you were, it was the winter, and if it was during the season, it was really those who were the most energetic to do so, or had like the supplementary resources to do so by, nonprofits or you just supplemental resources. And so it became a very limited way of organizing around land. And so that was constantly very frustrating to me. I found that I needed to step back because I wanted to move beyond that sort of idea of like, what does it mean to be fragmented in the land, be at a piece of land? And it actually sort of seemed to change with the way that the law center was organizing with land as well. So when I came to the law center, we had just developed the radical real estate law school, which is a funny word, right? Like radical and real estate together. There's like, yeah, it's just a very apparent juxtaposition there. Like, how do you, and I'm very much thinking of, right, like, how do you radicalize real estate? Like real estate is inherently bankrupt, right, in a lot of ways. And so I think a lot of the work that we were doing in radical real estate law school is really sitting with that, right? It's like, what are these legal institutions that we are forced to sort of navigate through? And how do we take a stake to space in a way that is necessary with the real estate state, in the way that we have to navigate it as incidental. So a lot of the work that we do is like, okay, a lot of these legal barriers are sort of incidental to our work. But they're always there. They're always apparent. They're always something that we have to contend with. And so it reflected a lot on those sort of frustrations that I felt in my work, right? Because I just felt like part of what made land work so fragmented was that we were so focused on structure, on like on the real estate structure. We were always thinking about like, well, what are the best structures to like organize ourselves? And I think in the first panel, we were talking about how important it is to have an understanding of structure, but not for it to sort of mold us, but rather to understand how we can navigate with it, or navigate through it to then create something different. And so I think moving from like this fragmented idea of like an adherence to the structure and like letting that shape you, coming into radical real estate and then putting the relationship first is something really transformative, both to me and coming into the work, but also just in how the organization has developed. We often say at the organization, like land is not a thing, it's a web of relationships, right? And we have to understand that. I think a lot of the ways that we tend to maybe misinterpret reparations and rematriation is that we see land back or reparations as a terminus, right? Like a place to arrive, where really it's actually an opening, right? It's a way to contend with space and like take up space. I saw in the resources, a lot of people recommended Ruth Wilson Gilmore, but I really do love this one quote that she says, if justice is embodied, then it's also spatial. So then what does it mean to be spatial people and to like really contend with space. Yeah, and create land relations that then themselves mirror themselves in the land. And so often the way that we relate to each other is how we relate to the land. And that's sort of how our relationships have changed. And it's not to say that before that wasn't there. I really think that the law centers sort of start in, first, as Alejandra mentioned, we're a non-hierarchical organization. And so we're also internally practicing, like, what does it mean to be in a circle structure, right? What does it mean to be a self-directed nonprofit and sort of take power, but also have a really robust feedback network, right? Of how to like move the work forward. I think that was super important for us to be able to arrive at like why we had to come into land more explicitly, not just as a factor of production, but really something that underwrites everything, right? Because when we want to come back to land, we don't want to just come back to land to be on the land. We want it to be underwritten by the idea that the relationships that we have towards each other can have an impact on us. World building is material after all. So yeah, I'll leave it there.
So much there. I mean, I wish we had a ton more time, but I want to at least get two more things done. So first of all, I want to go back to something that Demario Cooper mentioned on the first panel, which I think is so important, and ask the two of you a question about that, and then we'll close it out with some thoughts on Jackson and how to move forward there. So Demario talked about just the reality of trying to engage with folks in the community, given the fact that people have lives to live, right? You got 3 kids and 2 jobs. You don't have time to be sitting around on a Thursday talking about this all day and, riffing about what we need to do and this and that. So I really appreciate that. And in my own work as an organizer, I found that was one of the big challenges. I'm showing up, knocking on people's doors, asking them, how can we organize? And they're looking at me like, you tell me, aren't they paying you to come and knock on my door? Because I'm cooking dinner. I don't know what you're talking. So I'm curious. It seems like you guys have done an unbelievable job of pulling folks in from the community, working with folks and allowing those folks to really direct the work that you do. And I'm just curious what the challenges have been around that. How have you gone about convincing folks to engage, despite the fact that they've got real lives to live and real challenges to deal with on a day-to-day basis? And that's for either or both of you.
Well, I think the work that we are doing is led by the Segorte Land Trust and the Winnemem-Wintu tribe, and they really came to us and said that they needed legal support, and there's been times, especially with the Winnemem-Wintu, where the issues that they had really weren't legal. They needed folks to come up and help to do cleanup days and build some infrastructure on the land and just make the village that they're inhabiting more livable, and I think when you reach out to people and you say, hey, do you want to come and help? People are responsive to that. There's something that's very grounding about, hey, let's go cook a meal, or let's go like fix this electrical issue or this plumbing issue. And from there, those relationships really make people feel like they feel a sense of belonging, they feel a sense of purpose. And it's those things that are very practical that then, they may also have expertise in real estate or law or relationships with city government, and they can bring those into the fray and support in that way. So for us, it's like just making it very real of, like seeing people face to face, bringing your skills to bear, helping with childcare, bringing your kids to a meeting, taking all of that into consideration. And then also saying, like we had some of our immigrant co-op work, we had somebody that was dealing with the custody issue. And we're not, we don't do that work at the law center, but some of us just kind of volunteered our free time to support with that because that was real to that person's life and their ability to be a leader within this immigration co-op movement. And so I think just reminding ourselves that we're people and that we, you know, don't need to adhere to strict boundaries that the profession imposes on us really helps us to like garner more and more community support, I would say.
Can I just add to that?
Of course.
I agree totally. I think that one of the best things to do is, you know, people are always like, meet people where they are. Yeah, but people need their needs met. So like right now, you know, people didn't have water. The organization, you know, Jackson People's Assembly is under People's Advocacy Institute, and they're part of a larger coalition in Jackson, Mississippi Rapid Response Coalition. So people didn't have water. So we were out there busting our butts, making sure people had water. And then, you know, if they said, well, we don't have food at home, well, then, you know, the organization I used to work for has a food pantry and you can go get groceries. And so just making sure that even when you can't provide what people need, that you have connections or know the people that can connect these dots. Because like you said, if you're cooking dinner and somebody comes in, I don't care. And I mean, even now, when I get texts from the Democratic Party, are you freaking kidding me right now? It is 7 o'clock and I'm trying to do bath time and I have 6-year-old twins. Like, not now. Like, so like, that's the thing. And that's what people think when you come and knock on their door. Like, you making money, I'm at the house, I don't have time for this. Da, 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 da. So if you go to people's houses and you say, hey, how are you doing? How are you making it through this? Is there anything that, you know, you need some information on or some more information on? How could we help you? I may not have money, but I do know where they have the food pantry that I, you know, sign up. Do you need help with your documents? We've had people that need help signing up for food stamps or signing up for housing, or, and that's a whole nother conversation, but, you know,
There's a
help with
housing
those
panel
type-
coming next, so stay tuned.
But yeah, those, so yes, you just have to make those relationships. Those are so important to do any of this work.
Agreed. Agreed. All right, I know we're short on time. Dr. Omari, it seems to me that the good news in Jackson is that you and Brooke are there. So thank you for everything. But can you say a word just about, you know, what is in place? What kind of work is happening right now on the ground to try to fix this, or at least, as Brooke says, meet people's needs in the moment, and then figure out how to handle this thing going forward?
Okay, there's a lot of work that's been going on. And I want people to know that prior to the water plant being impacted by the flooding and actually losing pressure, we were under a boil water notice that we had been under for almost a month from the State Department of Health. And that boil water notice was related to something called turbidity in the water, which apparently bacteria can hide in. Even though all of the testing that we were doing was coming back clean, there were like 2 samples out of 120 on various days that would come back with an issue. So we had been already pulling together a coalition of groups to help us deal with this situation, because when you're under boil water notice, like as Brooke said, and you have children and you're trying to cook and all of these things, it's a real inconvenience. And Jackson residents, for as long as I've lived in Jackson, there have been boil water notices. And that's since 1989. I mean, regular periodic boil water notices across various communities. But this one was a citywide boil water notice, which made it unique. So that coalition consisted of groups like the group that Brooke represents, the People's Advocacy Institute, the Mississippi Rapid Response Coalition, Kellogg Foundation brought in funding to pay for experts from the U.S. Water Alliance that could go out into community and help people understand what was going on with the water and help build support for the mayor's efforts to get money from the state. And the water crisis, when everybody lost pressure, that was when the national attention came in. So then those efforts became magnified even more. And we were able to start working with groups to pull in funding. The biggest issue with water has been the lack of resources to repair those things that break at the plant and to do ongoing maintenance, as well as the inability to pay competitive wages to keep the technical expertise that you need to run a plant. So right now, and we've been dealing with the EPA, we're under a sewer consent decree that was put in 2013. And the recent drinking water crisis led to an administrative order in 2020. The EPA typically comes in and demands that things be done with no concern as to whether or not the resources are there to do these things. So with the sewer consent decree, we had like $800 million worth of repairs and things that they wanted made, right? Then they came in with the drinking water administrative order, where that was going to be another $500 million to get that work done. So one of this part of the discussion that we've been having with the EPA, if you are concerned about environmental racism, if you are concerned that people have drinking water and that they have sewer collection systems that don't run in people's backyards and back up into their homes, then the federal government has to think about ways of bringing money to the table, right? Now, they have their programs where they deal through states, and we made the case for them that that doesn't work for Jackson, because the money that goes to the state of Mississippi, there's a concerted effort to keep that money away from us. So this recent, I don't know if you all heard the news yesterday that a federal judge signed a stipulated agreement where we will have I forget what his name, but he's going to be the czar. Ted Hennepin will be the czar of our water operations. Now, this is somebody who has 30 years of water experience, who's coming from Maryland, and he will be able to compile the kind of expertise necessary to address the issues that we are facing in the city of Jackson. So, and the discussion with the EPA is, as opposed to just being an enforcement agency, yes, we do need to make sure that drinking water is safe and all of those things. But when you come into these communities of color that are already impoverished, you have to bring resources. And I have to say that Administrator Regan has been very open to that discussion, and they have been working very hard with the city to bring resources to the community. So now that the stipulated order has been signed, we will be going out into the community to educate the community about the water situation, what the stipulated agreement means, and also getting input from the community as to what kind of governance of Jackson's water operations should be put in place as we move forward. The reason we're grateful that it's the EPA and not the state of Mississippi that took over our water system is because of the contentious relationship that we have with the state of Mississippi. And we know that all that they were interested in was bringing in a company, privatizing the water system, which would mean that our residents who are already impoverished and living below the poverty line would have to pay huge rate increases in order to just afford water. So the city is grateful for that assistance, and we will continue to work with everybody who wants to make sure we have drinking water, and that drinking water is affordable for the residents of the city.
Thank you so much for that comprehensive answer, Dr. Omari.
Can I
so-
just say what we're doing on the ground? Because she can't speak to
Please-
that. I'll
all
go
right.
fast.
All right, two minutes, and then we're gonna take a 10-minute break. All right. 2 minutes.
We have been holding marches and rallies and reaching out door to door, providing daily water distributions till we ran out. Now we're doing spot distributions for areas of the city whose pipes break and lose water and have boil water notices. We partner with the city. We work in coalition with over 30 organizations. And with the Mississippi Poor People's Campaign, they led our marches, and where we were doing that every 2 weeks. We have another one next Monday, and then we'll have a people's assembly around the water to give the community the updates and provide the needed education. They need to know what is going on, because there was a real fear that we were going to have a third party come in, take it over, and move everything away from the city like they already have done. And I just wanted to speak to that we are constantly screaming, free the land, clean the water, and keep it public.
I appreciate that. And I also just would encourage everyone to continue to pay attention to what's going on in Jackson, because I think part of the problem is that, there's a splash and people are watching the news for a week or two, and then they go back to their business, even though things continue to get worse. So please keep an eye out and continue to support the work that's happening in Jackson, and do your homework on Sustainable Economies Law Center. They're doing some incredible work, and support them as well. Thank you all so much. Thank you to the panelists. Really appreciate all of your time. Hand clap for them. As I said, since we stepped all over your coffee and snack break, we're going to take a 10-minute break now, and then we'll, I guess, jump into the housing panel after that. And we'll should have some time for the reception at the end. So, all right. Thanks, folks.